and that T in truth really spoke to the trauma that came forth from this book, that systematic trauma. Jim, similar to my father and I, we grew up in poverty, right? And to grow up in poverty is to grow up in trauma. Jim said that when he came to New York, he thought that he would live in a house that looked like the Home Alone crib, and that was not his reality. My dad let me know the various traumas that he had endured, similar to Jim, of being forced into a street system and being forced to defend himself in school and being forced to survive moments of violence. He told me over the phone that at the age of 25, he told me over the phone that it's a blessing to have a son who's the age of 25 because a police officer held a gun to his head at the age of 19 and said you would never see the age of 25. Trauma. He said that the R in truth really was about relationships. Jim's story, similar to my father, the way in which they survived these moments were because of key pivotal relationships. Jim's relationship with Marty and Christine is just as important as his relationships with Devon and Fernando, which you'll read in the book. My father's relationships with Melvin and me throughout my life. These people helped them to survive. He let me know that there's power in you unpacking that trauma, right? We often hear of these hard moments and then we fast forward to how they made it out, right? But we really don't put that moment, that time into realizing how did they unpack that trauma. One piece of the book that really stood out to me was Jim's experience in Boys Town and him having to wrestle with his anger and dealing and unpacking that trauma. We often don't put the moments that are equally as important in healing as we do the fetishizing of the trauma and the victory. We're trying to speed to the T, which is the testimony, right? I don't know if we got any churchgoers in here, but when I grew up, my grandmother used to take me to church on New Year's Eve where everybody had a testimony to give, right? And what a testimony really is a bearing of truth. It is where people get up and they share their perseverance stories, and we are lucky to have a stone of hope, which is that true testimony. Jim now he was able to get an education. He is the co-founder of Preparing Leaders of Tomorrow. He has worked as a youth care counselor. I then compare that with my father, who survived all of that and was able to get a degree and now works in Austin, Texas for General Motors in computer softwares. But what this also made me realize was just a week ago, I got a phone call letting me know that a cousin of mine was swept in a raid in Pennsylvania, right? And so as much as we celebrate these moments of victory, what Jim's story tells me is that there are still others out there that we often lose. And one line in the book that stood out is that the gravity of the world is still too heavy. The last letter in truth is, that's a trick, come on. H, all right, very good, y'all still with me, good. And that is really just to think about, this book paints, it forces you to look at the heart and the humanity of people who are often labeled as thugs and criminals. It forced me to look at the humanity of my own father, Patrick Harris I. It forced me to have a conversation with him and to allow him to tell his truth to me. Jim St. Germain is an author, he is a speaker, he is an advocate, he is an advisor, but most of all, he is a survivor. His story is similar to my father, to my students, to my friends, to my family. And though he stands as one, as Maya Angelou says, he stands as 10,000 as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for the author of A Stone of Hope, Jim St. Germain.